The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Peterborough once again. Now yesterday we saw Glinton, which was a very busy village being located on the old route of the A15. Well, this place is a bit more, shall we say, sleepy, because it's just basically one main road and everything is on that road, including a church which is the only one in the country that's dedicated to an 8th century Saxon saint. This is Peakirk. Peakirk, St Peggas Church. Next up in Peterborough we have the lovely little village of Peakirk, located just to the east of Glinton on the boundary of the Cambridgeshire Fens. Totalling 139 households, Peakirk is one of the smaller villages around Peterborough, but also one of the most desirable. It takes its name from a female saint, namely St Pega. Pega, who died in 719 AD, was the sister of St Guthlac of Crowland, and her cell was sited here. The privately owned and Grade 2 listed St Peggas Hermitage is possibly on the site of that cell today. Peakirk is the only village in the country to have a church dedicated to St Pega. A Grade 1 listed building, it has many beautiful features, including a fine series of wall paintings. It's said that St Pegga's heart was kept as a relic in the church and was contained within a heart stone. Today, the broken remains of that stone can still be seen in the south aisle window. It would still be in one piece had it not been smashed by Oliver Cromwell's troops during the Civil War. Aside from the church, Peakirk doesn't possess a lot in terms of landmarks. There is, however, a nice little pub called the Ruddy Duck. There's no school because, as we know already, that's in Glinton. There was at one time a railway station in Peakirk, but it's now closed. The railway line still passes through the parish and the old station buildings are still there, but now they've been converted into residential accommodation. We'll find them though on this walk because they're easily accessible thanks to a street called the Malards. Let's go for a little walk around the village then now and see what else Peakirk can tell us. After parking at the southern end of the village, we have to head north to get to all the good stuff here, and trust me, Peakirk has a lot of that. The main street through the village from south to north is called St Peggas Road. It's alternatively known as the B1443, and it becomes Deeping Road at the village green. As well as this road, there are several landmarks around this one that make reference to St Pega, who once lived in this very village. Our first talking point comes in the form of this building here on the right hand side of the road. Even though Peakirk has no station these days, there are remnants of its railway past. This is one of them. This is an old warehouse which had another name when it was in business. It was called St Pegggers Granary. It was built in the 19th century to serve the former Peakirk railway station and its goods yard. After lying derelict for many years, the building was restored and later served as a pine furniture store. Following the store's relocation, the granary reopened in 2011 as a community arts centre, although it only lasted for 2 years. The building has since been converted into a private residence. This street is called the Malards, and it's where you'll find what remains of the former Peakirk railway station. A lot of the former station buildings have now been demolished and replaced with modern residential properties. However, the main station building is still here. This was converted into a private residence in the early 1990s. It's notable for having a few external alterations, excluding a recent extension. Many of the original features, though, are still intact, even though the platform and goods yard have now been removed. Peakirk Station was in operation from the 17th of October 1848. It was originally opened as Peakirk and Crowland before the latter village was dropped from the name in 1871. It closed in 1961 for passengers and then completely in 1964. The railway line is still here though. It flashes past the village on its way between Peterborough and Lincoln. Yes, it was still not very uncommon, shall we say, to hear a train pass by Peakirk. In fact, I've heard one myself since I've been here. So, yeah, even though there's no station anymore, there is still a railway presence in this village. Now, the road starts to bend at this point, and next up is this house on the corner. The wonderful Peerk House is one of 16 listed buildings in the village, but if you search for this online, you won't find it. That's because it's alternatively listed as Greystones, an apt name given the colour of the building. It's an 18th century stone house with an ashlar facade. Although the interior has a rather plain 19th century staircase according to the listing, I reckon this is one of the best properties in Peakirk. Peakirk has just one public house, and this is it. It's called the Ruddy Duck. This owes its name to the proximity of the Peakirk Wildfowl Trust. More on that in a bit. The pub is Grade 2 listed, and it's a rare secular building. It was originally a row of cottages in the late 17th century. When it became a pub, it was at first called the Black Bull. It was likely renamed by the man who established the Wildfowl Trust. By the way, a ruddy duck is a North American duck species, alternatively known as Oxyura jamaicenis. I dare you to attempt saying that after you've sunk a few pints in this place. Next, we have the village hall. This was built from funds raised by the village and was opened in August 1974 by Thomas Neveson. It replaced a previous village hall, which was an ex-World War I army hut that had been moved from Oakham in the early 1920s. The main hall can accommodate up to 120 people, and it's in regular use most days of the week. The hall belongs to the village, and as long as there's a committee, there will always be a village hall in Peakirk. It has an ongoing maintenance and improvement programme, and to date this has included new windows, a new kitchen, replacement guttering and fascias, and additional storage facilities. Alright, so far everything you've seen has been on one main road apart from the old station, which was on the Malards. Now the landscape is starting to change a little bit because we've found our way to this junction here, and you can see the next thing to talk about is going to be that cross right there. Now behind that cross you can see a house, behind that there's a big green, and that's where the church is. And all the interesting stuff in Peakirk, the best stuff I think, is within this area. This cross is not a war memorial, nor is it a market cross. In fact, no one's totally sure exactly what on earth this thing actually is. Listed Grade 2 with Historic England, this, according to them, is a village cross and it dates from 1904. It's an exact replica of the Helpston cross in the village of the same name nearby. It has a tall octagonal pedestal, and the sides have crocketed gables and crocketed pinnacles to the corners with some crenellation above. It's all surmounted by an octagonal shaft with a gabled head and cross, and stands on a stepped base. Inscribed on the pedestal are the initials EJ and the date 1904. Even though we're in St Pegggers village, this should not be confused with St Pegggers Cross. That's something else entirely. Shaped like a saddle stone, St Pegggers Cross is covered in snake-like carvings of beasts and foliage and was part of a freestanding structure that once stood to commemorate her. The remainder of this walk will feature primarily two buildings with huge links to St Pega, the 8th century Saxon anchoress herself, who was England's first known female hermit. The first of them is the church, which is the only one in the entire country to carry a dedication to her. Today, this building helps preserve the memory of this little-known woman. Peakirk was originally called Pegakirk or Peakirk, which literally means St Pegga's Church. The earliest masonry in this building is late Anglo-Saxon and dates to about 200 years after Pegga's death. It's possible that the stone church replaced an even earlier wooden structure. The early stone church would have been a simple one, consisting of a nave and possibly a small chancel. It was extensively enlarged in the 12th century. The south aisle was added or rebuilt in the 13th century, and although the chancel was rebuilt in the 15th, the church had been overtaken in size at that time by the one in Glinton. Although Glinton is way bigger now, it was originally a chapel of ease to Peakirk. This was the mother church of the single parish of Peakirk and Glinton. The church remains small and has no tall spire to indicate its presence. Tucked away behind the village green, it's worth seeking out to discover its real glory. The church is open every day and visitors are very welcome. When you walk in, you cannot fail to miss the wall paintings, which are something else. Okay, we'll get to those paintings in a moment, but according to my research, apparently somewhere in this church there's the remains of what's called a heart stone, because St Pegga's heart was apparently put into a stone and kept, and it was damaged by Oliver Cromwell in the Civil War, or his troops, should I say. I'm looking around for it. Apparently it's somewhere on a window ledge. Now the only stone I can see on a window ledge is this one, but I don't think this is it. Is that it? It doesn't look very damaged, to be honest with you, if it is. Apparently it was smashed to bits, but that looks very much intact to me, unless it's been neatened up a little bit. But that's the only stone I can see on a window ledge, apart from one over there, but that's not it in this window here. So wherever that may be, that's one feature of this church. But the paintings are definitely another. Let's check these out. These paintings are early 14th century and they're anchored by a somewhat faded depiction of St Christopher. Either side of him are the main sequences. These can be seen as kind of a cartoon strip telling the story of Christ's Passion. In addition, on the north wall are two morality paintings. One of them is the Warning to Gossips, which shows two women. They're enjoying some intense gossip with the devil perched on their shoulders, pressing their heads together. The other one is the Three Living and the Three Dead, which shows three gorgeously dressed kings hunting in a flower-strewn forest where they encounter three skeletons surrounded by worms and moths. These are emblems of decay. The story tells how the dead accost the living and say to them, "As you are, so were we. As we are, so you shall be." The Three Living and the Three Dead is a popular subject for wall paintings, but the Warning to Gossips is more rarely found. The presence of these paintings on the church was recorded by Edmund Artis, the early 19th century local antiquarian and archaeologist and house steward to Earl Fitzwilliam. They were fully uncovered and recorded in 1951 by the leading expert on wall paintings of the time, Clive Rouse. Unfortunately, he covered the paintings in wax, a conservation technique that was already falling from favour. Although much of it was removed in the 1970s, some areas of detail have now been lost. Now we're on the village green, which occupies the piece of land in front of the church between it and Deeping Road. It's a nice little open space and it's got a playground too. Also on the green you'll find this information board which tells you about the Carr Dyke. This is a somewhat hidden piece of Peakirk's history, certainly not as in your face as those paintings. The Carr Dyke was, and still is in places, an artificial watercourse which follows the 6-metre contour between the Fens and the gravel uplands which Peakirk just about sits upon. It runs for 57 miles from the River Nene at Peterborough to the River Witham near Lincoln. You might recall we have mentioned it before when we were in North Kesteven. The Dyke is still visible intermittently as a depression and or earthworks in several places north of Peterborough, and guess what? Peakirk is one of them. The Dyke is thought to have been excavated during the Roman occupation of Britain, possibly by the indigenous workforce. Its exact date and function are open to speculation. Although we have no idea what the Romans called it, the name may derive from the Old British word car, meaning fen. Alternatively, it could refer to a ditch or dyke associated with an Anglo-Scandinavian individual called Carr. It appears that parts of the Carr Dyke were dredged regularly to prevent flooding. The Peakirk section was allowed to silt up despite the extensive fen reclamation schemes of the late 17th century. So what does all this have to do with the village green? Well, Ordnance Survey maps from 1824 onwards describe the line of the Carr Dyke as following a straight north to south course across this green before turning sharply westwards. Conversely, excavations in 2002 suggest that it completely avoided the green, instead running alongside Deeping Road before veering westwards. In order to determine the Carr Dyke's true route through the village, in 2016 the Peakirk Archaeology Survey Team, or PAST for short, conducted a survey led by Bob Randall. The results showed an anomaly approximately 12 metres wide, initially following the OS route across the green, which then turned to the northwest. It then linked up with a depression in the field to the north of Chestnut Close, which had already been determined to be the line of the dyke. The survey helped to confirm that this section of the watercourse was filled in deliberately at an unknown date. So, by stepping onto this green, you are literally walking on the route of an ancient waterway. I told you this was the good end of the village. We aren't finished yet either. Behind me there you can see there's a house that's called Chapel View Cottage, and the reason it's called Chapel View Cottage is because if you look out of its windows or step out of its front door, this is what you'll see. Now, that looks like an old chapel. Well, it is an old chapel, but it's much more than that. Now we come to the other landmark that has a huge connection to St Pega. This is supposedly where the woman herself lived. Not in this building though, you understand. This is St Pega's Hermitage, and this reputedly stands on her ancient home. So how and why did St Pega come to live in Peakirk? Let's explain. St Pega was the sister of St Guthlac and followed him when he came east from the Midlands to seek a remote place where he could live a solitary spiritual life. It's said that for a time St Pega lived with him on an island in the Fens. That island was located where the village of Crowland in Lincolnshire can be found today. Although St Guthlac supposedly appreciated her presence and loyalty to him, he sent her away, wishing to truly live alone. St Pega therefore settled here and lived in a hermitage. It was the closest point to Crowland that was on dry land, because, let's not forget, at that time this area was mostly swampy fenland. St Guthlac never forgot his sister. When he was reaching the end of his life, he sent for St Pega with a message. It said that he'd avoided her presence so that in eternity the two might see one another in the presence of the Father amid eternal joys. St Pega then made the journey by boat to Crowland to conduct his funeral rites, and in the following year set off on a pilgrimage to Rome. That's where she died in 719 AD. Now, the building that sits on the site of the Hermitage once held the remains of St Pegggers Cross. It was simply sat in the living room of the house, and its owner was unaware of its importance. In 2010, the house owner, Nick Everard, decided to sell it at auction because, in his own words, he could do well without the responsibility of looking after it. Selling it seemed like a good idea, but when he handed the stone over to Bonhams in London, he had no idea what a storm the Anglo-Saxon specialists would blow up. Until 2001, the cottage adjacent to the hermitage was occupied by a community of Anglican nuns. When they left, the entire complex became a Grade 2 listed residence. It was that which Everard and his wife bought, and with it he acquired the cross, although he didn't know much about its history or indeed its worth. St Pegggers Cross is one of very few sculptures that can be linked to a place whose significance in Anglo-Saxon times is known. Bonhams established it wasn't part of the listed building, which would have prevented its sale. The chapel had simply sold it with the house, without restrictions. Although telephone bids for the artefact were exceeding £9,000, they withdrew the cross from sale after they received numerous letters of protest. So the cross was saved, but what's happened to it since is unknown. As far as I know, it's still within the hermitage, but ideally it should be somewhere like the Peterborough Museum for public display. And if you know where to look here in Peakirk, you can find an image of St Pegga on the village sign. There you go. That is the lady herself, St Pegga. Now, just before we wrap this one up, let's talk a bit about the area that's to the north of St Pegga's Hermitage. It was a nature reserve called the Peakirk Waterfowl Gardens. It was opened in 1957 by the Peakirk Wildfowl Trust, itself founded in 1946 by the naturalist Sir Peter Scott. He was the son of Robert Falcon Scott, the Antarctic explorer. The site was originally a natural spring, and it was planted with osier beds and then used as gravel workings dug in the 1840s for use on the Lincolnshire Loop railway line. Once all of the gravel had been extracted, the osier beds were used for basket making. This activity had ceased a long time before the Wildfowl Trust became involved. When they came along, they transformed the old workings into the Waterfowl Gardens. It was originally 14 acres big and was officially opened by Prince Henry, the Duke of Gloucester. It was the Trust's second centre, with visitors averaging between 30 and 40,000 per year. 3 more acres were added in 1967. There were 700 water birds across some 108 species, 5 of which were threatened with extinction. By the mid-70s, there were 64,000 paying visitors, 8,000 of which were school children. However, visitor numbers soon fell, and in 1989 the decision was made by the WFT to sell the site. The Peterborough Agricultural Society leased the site in 1991 for 6 years, but it was uneconomical. Eventually it was sold into private ownership in 2003. The remaining birds were rehomed. A great attraction in its heyday, it's rather sad for the locals who remember it fondly to see it in such a derelict state. Efforts to reopen the site as a public park have so far proven unsuccessful. Time to move on again to the next parish in Peterborough. Now, as we know from both this episode and the Glinton one yesterday, this area was only just on dry land anciently. Now it's time to get ourselves into the Cambridgeshire Fens, where many moons ago, roads and paths simply just couldn't exist. You would have needed a boat. See you in the Fens next weekend. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.